Hey guys, welcome back to another video. If you're new here, my name is Radhika. I'm a junior doctor working in London as a paediatric ST1, and on this YouTube channel I make videos about life as a doctor, what I get up to in my spare time, and everything else in between. This video is about ranking foundation year jobs. So I know that those of you in final year at the moment are ranking your jobs for starting in August, which is really exciting, but it's a really confusing time and I remember it so clearly. I had no idea how to rank my jobs and what to do. A few of you have also messaged me asking for advice, so I thought it would be easier just to put together a video that lots of you can watch and hopefully find helpful. I asked on my Instagram stories if you'd like this and lots of you said yes, with lots of questions as well. So in this video, I'm going to go through my application process and my job ranking. I'm going to give you some tips that I wish I knew or things that people told me that I found really helpful, and then also answer any of the questions that you guys asked me that I haven't covered already. So let's get into the video. I'm just going to start by talking a little bit about the application process. If you already know about this, which you will do if you're in final year, then skip to the next part, but this is just for a bit of background for anyone that's not in final year but wanted to know a bit more. So in England, once you reach your final year of medical school, you need to apply for your foundation year jobs. There's FY1, foundation year 1, and FY2, foundation year 2, and you apply for both of these at once when you're in your final year of medical school. The application process is quite complex, but the main way that it's done is by giving you a score, and this score is made up of two main things. The first part of the score is your educational performance measure, and this is essentially the decile that you rank in your university compared to everybody else in your university. And then the second part is the situational judgment test, the SJT, which is one exam that you sit in final year and makes up half of your score. Then you do get a few other points for things like doing an extra degree if you've done one before, if you've done a BSc, and then how you do in that degree, so if you get a 2-2, a 2-1 or a first, and also if you have any extra publications, which you can get a maximum of 2 points for. So you can get a few points for other things, but the main bulk of it is made up by how you do at university and also how you do in this one situational judgment test exam. Then once you have your score, you apply to a deanery. So the whole country is split up into loads and loads of different sections by the UK Foundation Programme Office. So this is places like, I'm looking at a map of it now, East Anglia, Northwest London, Oxford, Peninsula, Wales, Wessex, all of the different parts of England. And then you then rank where you want to be the most. So say you really want to be in London, you might rank the different parts of London, and then you might rank different deaneries around London and then go from there. And then based on your score will depend on what deanery you get into. And then once you're in a deanery, you then rank the jobs within that deanery. And it will literally tell you that over the next 2 years, you will have these 3 jobs in the first year, these 3 jobs in the second year. And you need to rank the 2 years worth of jobs against each other, saying from what you want the most to what you want the least, and then you will get your job based on how high your score is. It's really complex, and I will leave a link down below to the UK Foundation Programme Office, which will have more information on it and explain it a bit better. But essentially, once you get into a deanery, you then rank jobs based on what you want most and what you want least, and where you want to be most and where you want to be least. So that's what final years are doing at the moment. They are ranking their jobs. They already know what deaneries they're going to be in and they're ranking their jobs, and then they will find out soon where they will be and they will start working in August, which is really exciting. So I just want to talk about my foundation year application process and my score and my ranking and things like that. So I got 49 points in my educational performance measure and I was in the second decile, and then I did my SJT, and obviously I had quite a strong score to start with and I was a bit worried about the SJT, but I ended up getting 38.98, so it did bring my average down quite a bit. And then I had a BSc, so I got 2 points for that, for getting a 2-1 in my BSc, and that was it. That was all my points. I didn't have any publications, so I didn't get any extra points for that. I really wanted to stay in London because my whole life is in London, my family are in London, and I really wanted to be in North Central / East London. I don't know why, I think I just wanted a new part of London to explore. I definitely didn't want to be in Northwest because I went to Imperial and I wanted a fresh start. I didn't want to be where I'd gone to university in the same hospitals again. I wanted like a new beginning in my career as a doctor. And unfortunately, I didn't get into North Central / East London, which I was really gutted about, but I did get into South London. And I wasn't really sure what to make of this. I don't really know South London. I haven't really explored South London other than like going to Infernos. So I wasn't really sure, but obviously I was still really happy to be in London. I was quite worried because South London's really big and you can get jobs down in Surrey or in like Kent and places like that. So I was a bit worried about that, but I kind of just thought I'll take what I get and we'll see how I go. So I took the spreadsheet, and I know in South Thames you have to then apply to sections as well. So I did London Link 1 because I basically wanted to be in London and I thought I'll try and be as close to London as I can with London Link 1. But I did spend a really long time looking at each subdeanery and looking at the scores in that as well. If you don't know what I'm talking about with the subdeaneries, don't worry. It's only specific to certain deaneries such as South Thames. So I ranked my jobs. I knew I really wanted to have paediatrics and obs and gynae in my rotations because I wasn't sure which of those I wanted to do as a career, and I thought maybe GP as well, but I really just wanted to have O&G and peds because I wanted to see what they were like working in them instead of being a medical student in them. So I really prioritised paediatrics and obs and gynae, and I also really prioritised being as close to London as possible. I spent a really long time ranking my jobs, and I'll talk about how I did it exactly. And I then ended up getting my 11th choice, and that was, I've written it down because it wasn't the same as what I ended up doing, which I'll also talk about later. But the jobs I got were psych liaison, gastroenterology/general medicine, orthogeriatrics, and then for F2, pediatrics, obs and gynae, and then endocrinology/general medicine. So those are the jobs I got on a piece of paper. Those are what I thought I would be doing. But then I actually ended up doing a slight variation of that, and there's a few different reasons why. The first change that didn't happen was I didn't end up doing gastro. So I went to the gastro ward on my first day of that rotation, and I got an email basically saying that they had a rota gap in the AAU department and they needed me to fill it because it was more important that that was filled than the job on the gastro ward. So I did one day of gastroenterology, and then I ended up doing AAU for 4 months instead because that's what they needed me. And I had such a good time. I'm really glad it happened that way, and I learned so much from that, but it wasn't what I thought I'd be doing, which was really weird. And they obviously gave me a choice in it. They said, you don't have to do it. And I spoke to a few people, I spoke to my supervisor, and they all said this would probably be a better job for you, so do that. So that's what I ended up doing, but that's not what I thought I'd be doing. The next change that happened was you can actually swap jobs, and I'll talk about this more later in my advice section, but I ended up swapping my last 2 rotations of F2. Sorry, I'm looking this way because I'm looking at my computer screen so I don't explain this wrong, but I ended up swapping. So I was meant to have obs and gynae and endocrinology, but I really wanted an A&E job, so I ended up swapping with someone else who really wanted an endocrinology job, and I did A&E, and then I was meant to do obs and gynae, and they took my obs and gynae and did endo. So we swapped 2 rotations together, which then meant I got to do A&E and they got to do the endocrinology that they wanted to do. But I don't know if they wanted to do endocrinology or they just didn't want to do A&E, but basically they wanted to do the swap. So I was like, great, we'll do the swap because it works better for me as well. But yeah, so in the end, I ended up doing psych liaison, AAU, orthogeriatrics, pediatrics, and then I did 8 months of A&E because I didn't end up doing my obs and gynae rotation because of coronavirus. So it ended up being quite a lot different to what I thought I'd be doing. But that's fine, and I learned a lot from it, and I really enjoyed F1 and F2. If I'm honest, there were parts of F1 I didn't enjoy, but I look back and I have learned so much. I'm definitely more of a doctor than I was when I started. I made some really good friends. I had some highs and I had some lows, but at the end of the day, I really did enjoy my F1 and F2 when I look at it broadly rather than in a day-to-day aspect, and I think it taught me a lot and I really learned a lot. So now I want to give you some general pointers about your ranking your jobs. And these are things that people either told me or things that I wish people had told me, and I want to make sure you guys know as well. The first thing is, please know that whatever you have, you will be fine. I know someone who accidentally ranked their jobs on the left-hand side of Oriel and didn't drag them over, so they end up getting randomized to a random place, and I think ended up on the Isle of Wight or Guernsey and still had a really good time. I have friends or colleagues who ended up being in the middle of nowhere but then met someone and are now getting married to them or are married to them. And the thing is that even though things may not go to plan and things may not be exactly how you pictured or what you wanted, things will be okay and you will learn a lot, and it's only 2 years and it goes by so quickly. At the end of the day, everyone has a different experience of their foundation year jobs, and you try to control that as much as you can when you're ranking your jobs, but you really can't control it, and it really does depend on what everyone else does. You do things to favour certain options and to increase the likelihood of something happening, but if it doesn't work out that way, there are still so many things that you could do to compensate for something you've missed out on, and you will still learn so much regardless of where exactly you are, and you'll just have a completely different experience. Like if you really want to be in London and you end up in the middle of nowhere, you will have a completely different experience, but you will have so many positives from that as well, and you won't hate it and you will have a really good time. Literally, trust me. I know so many people who it hasn't worked out for at the time, but actually they look back and they did really enjoy their time and they learned a lot and they made some really good friends. And at the end of the day, that's what's really important in your foundation year jobs. Learning how to be a doctor and making a group of supportive friends is what I feel I really took out of my F1 and F2 year. So please don't stress about it if you don't get your top choice, your top deanery, or you get your 60th job choice. Please, you will still learn loads and you will still have a really good time, and it is only 2 years, don't forget that. Now, one of the most helpful things that someone told me was that if you're really interested in something and you think you might want to specialise in it, then try and have it in your F2 year rather than your F1 year. When you're in F2, you're counted as an SHO, which is a senior house officer, and you're put on the same part of the rota as people who are already in their training. So as an ST1, I'm also an SHO, but on my rota there's also F2s on it. So it means that they really get a proper understanding of what being an SHO is. They have much more responsibility and they have a much better understanding of the specialty rather than F1. I would really recommend that if you are interested in something, then try and have it in your F2 year, and that's exactly what I did with paediatrics. Some people also say that if you know you don't want to take an F3 year, then try and have the specialty that you're interested in your first job of F2. Now, this is quite difficult to control and it's not essential, but it can be quite helpful. So say, for example, you know you want to do obs and gynae, then if you try and have your obs and gynae job in your first job of F2, then you can see what it's like as an SHO and then also apply in October time. So you've got August and September to see what it's like, see if you really like it. And if you do like it, then you can apply in October. And that's what I did. I did paediatrics in the first job of F2. I really, really enjoyed it. I was always going to take an F3, but I enjoyed it so much that I thought, let me just apply now. And then I applied in October and got in and got a good job, so I decided not to take an F3. So if you're really interested in something, try and have it in your F2 year so that you have more responsibility and you have a better understanding of what the job is like rather than as an F1. Another thing I would really recommend is try to have an A&E rotation if you can. I did my A&E rotation in my F2 year, and as I said earlier, I wasn't initially meant to have it, but when I was in F1, some of my colleagues said having an A&E rotation is really helpful. You learn a lot. It's a baptism of fire, but you learn so much, you're independent, and you're seeing lots and lots of different cases, and they basically recommended to me that I try and swap and have an A&E rotation. So that's what I did, and I really think that having an A&E rotation is really, really helpful. It builds your confidence. You're seeing patients in a completely different way to when you're on other rotations, and you really understand what it's like to be working in A&E, so that if you end up specialising and you end up doing medicine or surgical training or paediatrics or psychiatry, anything, you understand what it's like to be in A&E, to be seeing a patient fresh, and to know the pressures that exist on being an A&E doctor, to understand what it's like having a few patients at once to juggle, to be seeing patients independently and then having a senior review them, and to be seeing a patient for the first time before another doctor's seen them, and to be getting the story as much as you can yourself. All of these things are really helpful things that I learned whilst I was on A&E, and I really do recommend that you try and have an A&E rotation during your 2 years. Better if it's an F2, but even as an F1, it will still be a really useful experience. Another thing that's really helpful to know is that you can swap jobs if you can find someone to swap with. So when I realised in my F1 year that I really wanted to have an A&E rotation in F2, I posted on the Facebook page for my deanery and basically said, is anyone at this hospital next year and has an A&E rotation and wants to swap? These are my jobs. And luckily, someone did want to swap with me, and they wanted to get rid of an A&E rotation, and I wanted an A&E rotation, and they wanted what I had, and I didn't mind giving up what I had. So we agreed to swap. We had to email quite a few different people to basically say we wanted to swap this, and the trainee program director had to approve it, but we were able to swap, and I'm really, really glad I did. And again, it's not really something I knew I could do until I ended up doing it myself. So do bear this in mind when you're ranking your jobs and when you get your jobs, that if you don't have exactly what you want, then keep an eye out and see if you can swap, and ask around to see if anyone's willing to swap, and post on the Facebook page and say what you've got and see if anyone is interested in swapping with you, because then you can get a better range of jobs that suit you more than other people. As far as I know, I think it's harder to swap jobs in F1, and I think it's easier to swap in F2, mainly because of the time needed to organise a swap. So do bear that in mind as well. But F2 jobs are more easy to swap if you want to, and if you can find someone that wants to swap with you. The next thing I want to talk about is district general hospitals and tertiary hospitals and understanding the difference between them. Now, district general hospitals are like the big hospitals just outside of cities or outside of cities. So if you think about London, and I know North West Thames good well because of university, but a hospital like Hillingdon is a district general hospital, and then when something more specialised comes up in their A&E, or if a patient needs more specialist care, they then might get referred into a tertiary hospital, like for example St Mary's in London. And tertiary hospitals tend to have a lot more specialist care, they tend to be a lot more niche, and they have consultants who are doing like cutting edge research and really know a lot about a specific topic. My F1 and F2 years were both at district general hospitals, and I would really recommend at least trying to do your F1 in a district general hospital, also known as a DGH. I just think that DGHs You, as a junior in a DGH, you have so much more opportunity to learn. You're quite well supported, but not too much that you don't get to learn, and you also see a really good range of things. If you end up being in a tertiary hospital for your first job or your first year, then you end up being quite specialist, and then you aren't able to actually do very much. So say I were an F1 in a district general hospital doing a surgical rotation, I might have the opportunity to go to theatre every now and then. But if I were in a tertiary hospital, it might be that the theatre time is too niche and too specialist, and that there are actually surgical trainees who need to have that theatre time more than you do. So I do think that being in a DGH, especially in your F1 year, is really, really helpful, and would mean that you learn more and get a really good understanding of how to be an F1 and have a really good learning curve, but also be quite well supported. I did my F1 and F2 at a DGH, and I've actually never worked in a tertiary hospital, and I found that really, really helpful. I really did learn a lot, and I've just felt that I've had the room to grow, but also been well supported, and I haven't really felt that things are too specialist for me. I'm going to a tertiary hospital next year, so we'll see how that goes. A tertiary hospital is kind of like the next step. So like if we get a patient in A&E, for example, and they have something specialist or they need neurosurgery, then we refer to a tertiary hospital because they're more specialists and they have the neurosurgeons. But I just don't think that as a junior and as an F1 and F2, you get as good of a learning experience being in a tertiary hospital. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't have many friends that have worked in tertiary hospitals as their first year. But I just, from my personal experience, I do really think that being in a DGH is really good, and it's something I would recommend you try and do if you can. If you don't know if your hospital is a DGH or a tertiary hospital, literally just Google the hospital name and then district general or tertiary, and it should give you a better inclination of what kind of hospital it is. But I think it's really important to understand the difference between these two and understand the difference of the type of experience you might get working in either as an F1 and an F2. But yeah, I'm very pro DGH, and I think that you can really get opportunities to excel and to learn in a DGH compared to in a tertiary hospital. But obviously I'm biased because I've never worked in a tertiary hospital, but yeah, that's just my own opinion. Now, the last thing I want to talk about with my tips and pointers is something that I hadn't realised until it happened to me, but I found starting on psychiatry really, really hard. And I think it's because I started in as an F1, I was really excited to be a doctor and to kind of use everything I'd learned during my 6 years of medical school. And I found that when I started on psychiatry, I was very supernumerary, and I didn't really get a chance to kind of spread my wings like everybody else did, and I felt kind of left out. I'd always see my F1 friends doing really cool things or learning really cool things, and then for the rest of the F1 year I did feel quite left behind because I'd started on psychiatry, and I spent quite a long time resenting this. Now, I do think that my psychiatry rotation has given me skills that I wouldn't have known otherwise, and it's really built my communication, and I'm a lot better at psychiatry because I had a rotation in it. But I do think that I wish someone had kind of said to me that it might be a bit hard starting on psychiatry. And for some people, they haven't found this a problem at all. And I know other people that started on psychiatry and literally were fine. But it's just something to think about, that when you start on a job that's not general medicine or surgery, that you might find it a bit more tricky, that you're not kind of getting a chance to use all the medicine that you've learned in the last few years and use everything that you've known from finals and from your elective and things like that. So I do think that's something to bear in mind, and just something that I wish someone had told me. So I'm just going to quickly tell you about how I ranked my jobs, because I know everyone does it differently, but again, how do you really know how to do it? So what I did was I thought about a few main things that I really, really wanted. And those were, I really wanted, as I said, a job in obs and gynae, a job in paediatrics, and I wanted to be near London. And so what I ended up doing was taking all the jobs and exporting it onto an Excel spreadsheet, which you can do quite easily on Oriel. And then I highlighted all of the ones that had obs and gynae, highlighted all the ones at paediatrics, and then I spent ages researching all of the hospitals. Now, I looked at things like how big is the hospital, I spoke to people and found out their experiences and what they thought of the hospital, how easy is it to get to, do I need a car, can I get there by train, how far is it from London, things like that. And I then kind of had an idea of which hospitals I wanted to work in more and which hospitals I was less keen to work in. So then I basically took my spreadsheet and turned everything into numbers. And this is a method that quite a few people use, and I found it really helpful just to make it numerical and have a really good understanding of each job. So what I did is I basically assigned a number to each job. So if there was a job that I really, really liked or really wanted, I would give it a high number, like a 10. And if there was a job I didn't really want or I wasn't that fussed on, I'd maybe give it like a 3 or a 4. And if there was a job I really, really didn't want, then I'd give it a minus number. So I did that for all the jobs, and then I also did that for the hospital. So then I had a rough score for each job line and had a much better understanding of how I'd rank them. Then I looked at them, not with the numbers, and kind of readjusted them a bit more about how I'd want them and what I'd prefer to have over another. And that just really helped me to rank the jobs and kind of get a more mathematical understanding of it, rather than just kind of seeing how a job made me feel. And it helped me kind of, because there's so many jobs and it's so overwhelming, it just helped me kind of make sense of it all and kind of have a better idea of what I wanted. So I would really recommend doing this. I know it takes a bit of time, but putting numbers on it does just make it a bit more logistical and logical. No, logical, not logistical. Putting numbers on it makes it a bit more logical and just helps get a better understanding of the jobs. And be sure that you're ranking the ones that you'd enjoy more higher than the ones that you're not really sure about. Okay, now I'm going to cover some of the questions that you guys have asked me, and the one I got asked the most was, should you rank based on hospital or should you rank based on the job? Now this is a really hard question to answer, and if I'm honest, I can't tell you exactly what you should do because it depends on your own priorities. So I decided what my priorities were and I ranked based on those couple of priorities. It's really unlikely that you'll get your dream or perfect set of jobs, and to be honest, it might not even exist, having exactly what you want in the order that you want, in the hospitals that you want. Also, it's important to remember that every single job is different, every single rotation is different, every single hospital is different, and you may have really enjoyed somewhere as a medical student, or you may have really enjoyed a certain placement as a medical student, but it probably will be different as a doctor, and it's important to bear that in mind. We really do try and control everything we can, but it's really hard to, especially with this ranking system. So my advice would be to have 2 or 3 things that you really want to prioritize. And like I said, for myself, that was having a job in obs and gynae, having a job in pediatrics, and having jobs close to London. Have a few things that you really want to prioritize and rank your jobs based on that. But it's really hard to say whether you should prioritize hospital or jobs because it really depends on your own personal situation and what is important to you. I personally think that for me, when I was applying, I really wanted to know what obs and gynae and pediatrics would be like as jobs, so I really did prioritize them, and I was willing to be a bit further out of London in order to have those jobs. So for yourself, just think, what do you want, what's important to you, and what kind of experience do you want, and what will make a difference to your future or help you decide your future or your specialty. So sorry I can't give you a clear answer, but that's because it really depends on your own personal situation. But I would just think about what your priorities are, what you want, and how important is it for you to have a specific location rather than a specific job, and what would you benefit from having a specific job rather than a specific location. So you need to kind of weigh out each one, think of the pros and cons, but also think and realise that the experience may be completely different to your expectations, and you kind of need to go with that. And a job might be way better than you thought it would have been, or a job might be way worse than you thought it might have been, and that kind of comes with the process of it, if that makes any sense. The next question is, if you don't get a job you want, is there a way to do it in an F3 year? Yes, definitely. So say you wanted to do a job in orthopedics and you don't get a job in orthopedics, then you could apply for a clinical fellowship in your F3 year, and then you could work as an orthopedic SHO and see what it's like and see if you like it, and then see if you want to apply in your F3 year. So there is also always an opportunity to do that. And like I said, there's the opportunity to swap as well if you can, and if you can find someone to swap with. Someone else has asked, when would be the best time to have a peds placement? So like I said, if you know you want to do pediatrics and you know you want to apply, then the best time would be to have it in your first block of your F2 rotation, because then you have an experience of what it's like as an SHO, and you also have time to apply in October after having done pediatrics for 2-3 months. Which jobs are generally more laid back versus intense? That's a hard question, and like I've said, it does depend on the job and the hospital, but laid back rotations, one I can think of is psychiatry is more laid back than other jobs, but being in an inpatient psychiatry ward can be quite intense, whereas I did liaison psychiatry, so that was probably a bit less intense. But psychiatry, from what I understand from my colleagues, is a bit more laid back. Intense jobs would include things that have an intense rota, so A&E has a really intense rota and you're in quite a lot and you're doing a lot of shifts and a lot of nights. Pediatrics and obs and gynae also have quite intense rotas, and I think surgical rotas are also quite intense. It's not really intense, it's just busy and having a lot of shifts and probably having nights a bit more than other people might. Did you enjoy F1/2 in London, or was it super stressful? So my F1 and F2 jobs have been just outside of London / in London. I'm not going to say exactly where because I don't like to share where I work because people on the internet are weird, but if you DM me I can let you know. I was in South Thames, so if you need more information on South Thames hospitals, then message me. I really enjoyed it. I think London is great. You get to see lots of different things, you get to see lots of different cultures, and I just think I really do love working in London. I don't think it was super stressful, and I don't think it's any more stressful or less stressful than working in another city. But if you want to be in London, then that's something to think about. Another really good thing about London is that when you are working in London as a doctor, you get something called London waiting. So you basically get given about £2,000 a year on top of your salary because you are in London and because London's more expensive. So that's also a really great perk of being in London, because obviously London is more expensive to live in, but you kind of take that into account when you're deciding to live in London. But you are actually paid a bit more to be in London and to live in London and to work in London because it's more expensive. So that is also a really nice extra bit of money as well that does help. What specialties are supernumerary, so only 9 to 5? Now, again, this does depend on the hospital. A lot of F1 jobs, particularly ones that are in more specialist areas, are seen as supernumerary, and you're kind of just seen as there to learn. So supernumerary basically means you're not an essential part of the team, and the team will still function without you, but if you're there, they will give you things to do and you will learn things. So I would say, yeah, specialist jobs. I know some of my colleagues did things like radiology in their F1 year, or say you're doing like hand surgery as an F1 rotation, or say you're doing like I don't know, really niche eye surgery as an F1 rotation. That would be seen as a supernumerary job, because you're not going to be doing the hand surgery and you're not going to be doing the really specialist niche stuff, but you are going to learn, and you're going to learn how to do doctory things. So it really does depend on the job and the rotation, but if it seems quite specialist and quite niche, then it's seen as supernumerary. And I would advise to try and do as many general things as you can in your F1 and F2 year. And then someone else has asked, what would be the best or worst rotation to start on that would make life easier or harder later? So like I said, I found it quite tricky starting on psychiatry. Best rotation to start on, I think something really general, like general medicine, general surgery, acute medicine, just something really general, something that you can really absorb as much information and learn as much as you can from, I think would be the best to start on. But like I've said in this video, you can't control everything, and you kind of need to consider what you will be able to control and won't be able to control, and prioritize what's really important to you. So if you can't control the first job, I wouldn't stress about it too much, and I would think about I would prioritize other things like the specific jobs later on in the rotation than your first job itself, because it's quite a hard thing to control for, and it's probably less important than other things down the line, like having a specific job in your F2 year. What do you wish you knew in hindsight? So what I wish I knew in hindsight is that everything will be okay. I think during this time when I was applying in 2018, I really did try and control as much as I can, and I got really stressed out about ranking my jobs, and I think I was even quite gutted. Well, I was gutted that I got into my second choice deanery, and I think I was quite gutted that I got my 11th choice, when actually that's quite good. And in the end, everything's worked out really well. I love my paediatrics job. I ended up having 8 months of A&E, and I never did that obs and gynae rotation. I didn't do gastro. I started on psych liaison and spent ages thinking I didn't know how to be a doctor, even though I do know how to be a doctor. What I wish I really knew in hindsight is just knowing that it would all be okay, regardless of how much I try and control it and how much I try and rank jobs in a specific way and try and give myself this and that. You might not get what you want, and you probably won't get your first choice, but it really does work out, and you will end up in a really good position in 2 years' time, regardless of the jobs you have. So yeah, that's what I wish I knew in hindsight. I wish I knew that everything would be okay, regardless of what I was stressing about and regardless of what I was trying to control with my rankings and things like that. Right guys, that is everything. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, then leave them in the comments below and I'll happily answer them. And I hope that your ranking goes well. Don't stress about it too much, honestly, trust me, it will all be okay, and you will have a really good F1 and F2 regardless of where you end up. Don't forget to like and subscribe and comment and follow me on Instagram and all that jazz. I will see you in my next video. Thanks a lot for watching guys, bye!